Oh, this is Dale with NT Zone, and what I want to do with this video would actually require a few different videos to treat it sufficiently. But that doesn't mean I can't just go over the bare bones of it, does it? I mean, that's sometimes necessary. And where I would say that I need more nuance, I will just say in the video, this will be covered later, this will be covered later. So, looking at the main idea. So, when you are into this stuff for a while, typology, psychology, philosophy, um, you run into the number four a lot. And so, with Aristotle, for example, you have this proposition, uh, if A, then B. Then you have its opposite. Then you have down its sub-alternate. Then you have the opposite of that subalternate. And the subalternate is contrary to the opposite, and it goes the same this way. So you kind of get the drift right there. So you have four concepts. Now, how does this have to do with psychology? So, Dr. David Keirsey has his four temperaments: rationals, artisans, guardians, and idealist. Jung has four functions: thinking, feeling, sensing, intuition. And Galen has his four temperaments: melancholic, sanguine, choleric, and phlegmatic. So you have four. So what's the significance here? Well, you take one concept, you look at its opposite. You have two concepts then. So concept one is not the same as concept two. But wait, there's more. So you look at what's also can be said that's not quite related to this concept, but it might be related to this concept somehow. Or even on a different plane, you have concept three, concept four. So we know concept one is not concept two, but neither are concept three, which is not concept four. But four is not the same as them, but they're kind of in a dispute, as you will. Now, what Jung does is he takes his four functions: thinking and feeling, which are judging functions; intuition, sensing, which are perceiving functions. So, by doing this, he adds another layer of how to say it, attitude. So, then you have the 8 psychological types. Yes, I said 8. People talk about the 16 types of Isabel Myers and of the socionics, but originally there were 8, and this is why. Because that's how you start things. Now, what Isabel Meyer does, it doesn't matter if you love her or hate her or whatever. That's not my point of this video. If I were to give a critique of the MBTI, I would do it in a different video. She basically adds on the concrete auxiliary functions, and even more so comes up with this concept of tertiary function, even though there should be a transcendental function somewhere. And basically adding on to Jung's original work with an inferior function, and which exists in Jung and so on. And she goes her own way with it, but it's kind of somewhat divorced from Jung's psychology, which will be, by the way, when I do criticize the MBTI, I'm going to not show much mercy on that. It kind of needs to be talked about. But so you have these very broad categories within the 8. Not so broad categories, but still broad within the 16. Um, that all comes from this concept of fourness. Now that fourness comes from two-ness because, well, you have to start somewhere. So judging, perceiving, that's 2. But there are 2 types of judging, 2 types of perceiving. So you see that. And now, if we're talking about type models, now this is where things can get complicated. And so this can be more defined in future videos. But basically, if you're looking at a basic type model, you have the function as the type. I prefer that to the usual way of describing it, neo-dominant function, because I think the first function is very important. There's a distinction between the function as a function itself supporting that type versus the function itself as the type. So, for example, INTPs versus ENTPs, there's a slight difference there within how the function of introverted thinking is used and applied. Of course, when you're looking at introversion versus extroversion, introversion is the inwardness of the libido. So if I'm using introverted thinking, my introverted thinking is coming inward. But if I'm using extroverted intuition, my intuition is going outward. So basically, the biggest difference is the introverted thinking type with extroverted feeling auxiliary is supporting with this outward push of intuition the inwardness of the thinking, which is, how all these concepts relate in my mind. The cogito ego cogito. I think, therefore I think. Whereas we see with the extroverted, intuitive, introverted thinker, what's being supported is this outward push of intuition, which is being supported by this inward grasp of thinking. And, well, you basically see the difference. So, as a type, you will see the description of the introverted thinker versus the extroverted intuitive. The extroverted intuitives tend to be very great conversationalists, great salesmen, and so on. So they might use their introverted thinking in such a way as to try to sell ideas, which is why they're often associated with being debaters. They also have a lot of other tendencies we can talk about, but the introverted thinker, on the other hand, is not so good with the conversations. Yes, they can do it. Everyone can do the conversations, but they don't have the same advantage as the extroverted intuitive. They cannot be constantly outward. Remember, their main thrust is this inward pool of thinking, which is being supported by the outward thrust of intuition. So what they're doing is they're experiencing the world around them. They're gathering the facts with their thinking. The intuition's allowing them to spread out and look at, okay, well, this functions this way. Well, what about this? I wonder. And so they're playing with it in their minds. They're developing a system. Dr. David Kiersey talks about this as a system builder. Both types, of course, are system builders, but There's a slight difference. I'm not going to talk about that too much, but the introverted thinker, um, extroverted intuitive auxiliary, they're basically there to design the system of strategy. So, to an outward observer, they might be seemingly lazy, procrastinating. No, that's not the case. There's no procrastination going on there. You just can't read minds. That's the problem. And so what they're doing is they are gathering the facts. They are gathering the facts, they are analyzing it, compartmentalizing it, coming up with some type of solution to whatever problem that's going on. And that's the reason why we can't just assume things about types. Jung himself actually says that things basically do not always have the same appearance as they are. Now, he didn't say that in those particular words, but he says that in the Psychological Types, which is probably one of my favorite books on this subject. So you would have to observe things over time, and as you observe them, you'd get a clearer view, which is funny because a lot of typology communities don't do that. A lot of those typology communities want vibe typing. They want to use their synthesis and say, oh, you must be that type, without actually giving a care for how people actually are, or even trying to learn. So now we kind of have a basic grasp here, though. For type models, you have of course, you have the type function, as they call it, or the type or function as a type, which people would call dominant function, which will be opposed to the inferior function. Now, the inferior function is there because the type function must differentiate it from something, which is going to be its opposite. Introverted thinking, extroverted feeling. Now, then you have the auxiliary function, which I described as basically supporting the aims of the function type, or the type function. Next, tertiary function. I don't want to get into that too much. Some people, like a lot of people, believe it. I'm not really quite sure if I believe it really is so, but it makes sense that it's there because you can apply the same logic of support. So what's supporting the auxiliary function? And so then you have this sort of opposite to that, which is the whole entire idea of both socionic and MBTI on this type of thing. Of course, I will challenge that in a different video. I don't want to challenge it here, but you basically get the grasp there. And so you have these things which are very tightly connected in such a way where the type function, auxiliary function, but then the inferior function is connected like that, but the auxiliary function is connected like that. So you get the drill. This is basically structure. But what is the glue behind all this? Like, what is so important? It's called the transcendental function. Now, the transcendental function kind of is the glue which allows one thing to be its opposite. So, introverted thinking type, extroverted feeling type. So there has to be a function there which kind of allows this type of to happen, so that there's not just opposites, they have some type of connection. So this will be better for another video. I think I'll do that when I'm criticizing the tertiary function or talking about tertiary function, because I think there can be such a thing to be said of the importance of highlighting the transcendental function as a way to understand the psychology. Now, thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe.